I didn't make the wrong choices. That's the part that haunts me. I didn't ruin my life with a single mistake, or a reckless decision, or a moment of weakness. What I did instead was quieter. Slower. Almost invisible. I stayed silent. Whenever life asked me a question, I didn't answer. I waited. And while I waited, the answers were chosen for me. Most people imagine regret as something loud, a scream, a collapse, a dramatic moment you replay in your mind. Mine never raised its voice. It sat beside me patiently, growing heavier with every year I postponed myself. I remember being younger and believing that life would eventually become clear. That one day, something would click. That confidence would arrive like a permission slip, telling me it was finally time to act. So I waited for clarity. I waited for certainty. I waited for a sign strong enough to remove all doubt. And while I waited, my life kept moving without my consent. People around me seemed to know what they wanted. Or at least they knew how to pretend. They spoke in decisions. In plans. In timelines. I spoke in delays. I'll see. Maybe later. I'm not sure yet. Those words became my identity. At first, staying silent felt responsible. Why rush, why risk choosing wrong? I told myself that patience was wisdom. But patience, I learned too late, can become a disguise for fear. There were moments when my heart leaned towards something, a path, a person, a possibility. And every time, my mind stepped in with a warning. What if you fail? What if you regret it? What if you choose wrong and can't undo it? So I did nothing. I watched opportunities drift past me like trains I refused to board because I couldn't be certain of the destination. I told myself another one would come. They always do, people say. But not always the same ones. The strangest part is that my life didn't look empty. From the outside, it looked stable. Acceptable. Calm. I had routines. Responsibilities. People who knew my name. That made it harder to notice what was missing. There's a particular kind of sadness that doesn't hurt sharply. It dulls you instead. It makes everything feel evenly flat, like a sound turned too low to recognize the melody. That was my life. I wasn't unhappy enough to escape. I wasn't fulfilled enough to stay. So I remained suspended, present in body, absent in intention. Years passed this way. Not dramatically. Efficiently. Time has a way of accelerating when you're not actively choosing anything. Days blur. Seasons repeat. Birthdays arrive faster than expected. One day, I realized I had more memories of waiting than of living. That thought unsettled me. I tried to remember the last decision I had made because I truly wanted it, not because it was logical, expected, or safe. The answer didn't come easily. I had become an expert at adaptation. At fitting into situations rather than shaping them. At accepting roles rather than questioning whether they belonged to me. People described me as easygoing. Flexible. Low maintenance. They didn't know how much effort it took to erase my own preferences. Inside, I carried a quiet resentment, not toward others, but toward myself. I watched people choose boldly and wondered what it felt like to trust your own desire without interrogating it to death. Every unspoken want accumulated. Every avoided decision left a small residue of regret. Individually, they felt insignificant. Together, they formed a life that felt strangely unfamiliar. I remember standing in a room once, surrounded by people who had known me for years, and feeling like a guest in my own existence. They talked about plans I had agreed to without enthusiasm. A future I had nodded along to. I smiled. And felt invisible. That was the moment I understood something terrifying: if I never choose, life will still choose for me. And it will choose comfort over truth every time. Staying silent hadn't kept me safe. It had slowly erased my agency. And for the first time, I felt the weight of everything I had not said yes to and everything I had never said no to. That night, I lay awake with a question that refused to be postponed any longer: what if my greatest regret isn't the wrong choice, but the absence of choice altogether? After that night, silence stopped feeling neutral. Before, it had protected me. It gave me time, space, the illusion of safety. Now it felt like a weight pressing against my chest every time I avoided a decision. I began noticing how often life offered me moments that demanded an answer, not loudly, but persistently. A conversation that paused, waiting for my honesty. An opportunity that lingered just long enough for courage to show up. A relationship balanced on the edge of clarity. And every time, my instinct was the same: delay. I convinced myself I was being considerate. That my hesitation spared others from inconvenience. That silence kept the peace. But deep down, I knew the truth. Silence didn't protect anyone. It protected me from accountability. The moral dilemmas sharpened. If I spoke, I risked disrupting the lives of others' expectations, plans, versions of me they had grown comfortable with. If I stayed silent, I continued betraying myself. There was no option without cost anymore. I tried to return to my old logic. I reminded myself of stability, of gratitude, of reason. But those arguments sounded hollow now. They didn't address the real fear. I was afraid that once I spoke, I couldn't retreat. That my words would commit me to becoming someone I wasn't sure I knew how to be. Choice demands identity. And I had spent years avoiding both. The internal tension started to surface physically. Sleep became shallow. Concentration fractured. I felt restless in rooms I had once navigated automatically. Nothing was wrong. And everything was. I caught myself imagining alternative versions of my life more vividly than my actual one, not fantasies, just different sequences of honest decisions. I wondered who I might have been if I had trusted my instincts even once. If I had said yes without calculating the fallout. If I had said no without apologizing for existing. Those thoughts hurt, but they also clarified something essential. I wasn't afraid of making the wrong choice. I was afraid of standing behind one. Silence had allowed me to remain undefined, unaccountable, safe from regret, or so I believed. But the regret was there, growing quietly, compounded by every day I postponed myself. One afternoon, someone asked me directly what I wanted. Not casually. Not rhetorically. They waited. The room felt unbearably still. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. That moment exposed everything. I realized then how deeply I had trained myself to disappear when clarity was required. How often I had mistaken absence for humility. The shame didn't come from not having an answer. It came from knowing I had one and refusing to speak it. That night, I admitted something I had avoided naming for years: my silence was a choice. And like every choice, it had consequences. I had let life harden around me while I remained undefined inside it. I had allowed others to shape my future because it felt easier than risking rejection. But ease had a price. And I was paying it in years. For the first time, the thought of continuing this way scared me more than the thought of change. I didn't suddenly know what I wanted. But I knew what I could no longer do. I could no longer disappear in my own life. Silence had stopped being neutral. It had become a form of self-erasure. And once I understood that, the question shifted from what should I choose to something far more unsettling: what kind of life am I actively refusing to claim? The moment I finally spoke wasn't dramatic. There was no raised voice. No prepared speech. No carefully chosen words. It was almost disappointing in its simplicity. Someone asked me a question I had avoided for years, not about plans, not about work, not about logistics. They asked me what I wanted. And for the first time, I didn't hide behind uncertainty. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't soften it to make it easier for others to accept. I answered honestly. The silence that followed felt heavier than all the years I had stayed quiet. But it was a different kind of weight. It was real. That answer didn't fix my life. It didn't solve anything immediately. In fact, it complicated everything. People were confused. Some were hurt. Some looked at me like I had changed even though I had only stopped disappearing. I learned quickly that honesty doesn't feel brave in the moment. It feels exposed. There were consequences. Relationships shifted. Plans unraveled. Certainty evaporated. The comfort I had relied on for so long vanished almost overnight. And yet beneath the fear, beneath the instability there was something I hadn't felt in years. Presence. For the first time, my life responded to me. Not kindly. Not gently. But directly. Every decision now demanded participation. Every outcome belonged to me. There were days when I regretted speaking. When silence tempted me again with its promise of ease. When I missed the safety of being undefined. But then I remembered the cost. Silence had never been free. It had charged me slowly, invisibly, in time and self-respect. I wasn't suddenly confident. I wasn't suddenly certain. I was simply involved. I began making choices, not perfect ones, not heroic ones, but mine. Some led nowhere. Some led to loss. Some surprised me. But none of them erased me. I learned that identity isn't discovered in moments of clarity. It's built in moments of responsibility. By standing behind your words. By accepting the weight of consequence. By allowing your life to reflect your voice, imperfect as it may be. The regret didn't disappear. It changed shape. Instead of haunting me with what if, it grounded me with what now. I stopped mourning the person I might have been. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood something essential: you can't live a life you never claimed. Looking back, I don't blame myself for being silent. Silence felt safe when I didn't trust myself to choose. But I do hold myself accountable for how long I stayed there. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in the hesitation, in the waiting, in the quiet avoidance, I won't tell you what to choose. But I will tell you this: life doesn't pause while you gather courage. It continues, uninterrupted, shaping itself around your absence. You don't need certainty to speak. You need honesty. Because the greatest loss isn't choosing wrong. It's never choosing at all. I didn't find the perfect life by breaking my silence. I found a real one. And for the first time, I can hear myself in it.